Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational Next Economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Sara Day, welcome to the show.
Wonderful to be here, Erin. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And I love starting with our guests for you to explain, where do you consider home and why?
It's a great question, also a tough question for me because home is a rather ubiquitous space. I am a sixth generation Kentuckian, that feels like home, who has lived also on the West Coast and in California for a number of years and in Asheville, North Carolina, and spending time on the East Coast. And what I guess I need to say is that I get different things from these places. I work primarily in Kentucky, but with businesses from across the region. So I couldn't call one place home.
And I think that's so fitting. So talk a little bit about accelerating Appalachia. You have this beautiful tagline, you're accelerating nature-based businesses. Talk a little bit about what you do and what that is.
That came out of just my early years of a free-range childhood and living very close to nature, and grateful for my parents and many others in my family for allowing me the space to roam and connect to nature and be a part of it. I mean, we really are nature. We just kind of gotten a bit disconnected. So that early influence in my life has, and again, across the Appalachian region, my family lived in Virginia, and I've lived in West North Carolina and Kentucky and worked all across the region. So number one, just having that kind of early childhood and then my growing awareness of that region as one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, and the deep nature and the deep diversity of nature in this region is extraordinary and not to be found anywhere else. I worked within government for a while in natural resources, and it always bothered me, that term, natural resources, that nature was a resource to be extracted and used for human consumption. So when I was ideating around how to solve for more regenerative businesses and thinking about what is it that we can do to help regenerate nature, I couldn't say natural resource-based businesses, just sounded too formal. Not to coin another term, because I think regenerative is wonderful. At that time, I wasn't really even using the term regenerative. It was just more of a process of looking at the kinds of businesses I was seeing actually literally sprouting up out of our region in food, farming, forest products, fiber, wellness, and wanting to honor them and the processes.
Thank you for sharing that, because I often feel sometimes a little bit like I'm in a bubble in California, in that I take a tremendous amount of inspiration from my colleagues that are working in Kentucky and North Carolina, because there's so many people working with the land in a way that really seems to me like a different spirit of engaging with the land. And I know we're going to get into some of the stories of those entrepreneurs, but could you talk maybe a little bit around what Accelerating Appalachia actually does for entrepreneurs, and what are some of the kind of maybe core values that you approach your kind of very technical business service provision?
Right. Because and as much as we're honoring these beautiful businesses and their vision, we are also very grounded in the practical aspects of business development. And the process is that we open applications. We get applications for businesses. We're seeking certain criteria within those businesses of their intent. They don't have to be all the way there 100% regenerative and, best in the world, B Corp, et cetera. But their intent is there. Their leadership is open to transform it to leadership development, because so much of it comes down to the individuals and who's leading this program and sort of what's at their heart. And, they affect their business completely where they're at. So, but then we get into the pieces and parts of their value chains, their financials. Are they seeking investment? What kind of investment? Do they seek to scale? Are they going to, do they want to remain local? Do they want to go regional? Do they want to scale nationally? And we have all levels of those kinds of businesses. Some want to serve like a tri-county region. Most of them are regional in scale, and then another handful are scaling nationally. And then, yes, we have a sustainable business curriculum. 2017 has found us working with some amazing women that are leaders in regenerative, resilient agriculture, and then diversity is an asset training, because the other important piece for us, besides regenerating nature, is regenerating people and understand the importance of cultural diversity as well. So we're working with these women to bring them into the program and to actually develop a deeper regenerative business development curriculum. So that's actually what's underway right now. But we take applications from all over we get applications from all over the country, and about 15% from outside the country. We were just so surprised when we opened up, because obviously we're focused on the southeastern region. And we select, majority are from our region, although each cohort we've always had one or two from outside the region. For instance, last year we had a business from Brooklyn that came in. So we're not just super strict about that. If we see a really cool business solving a great challenge around, being more connected to the soil and the land and water restoration, then we'll consider them. So they go through a 12-week, it's an intensive, over a 12-week period. And then within that, we have 3-day sessions. We host those sessions in different parts. We are a mobile program. Just as I was saying, it's hard for me to name one place as my home. I believe in the strength of weak ties for myself and then for our businesses too, that okay, so you've connected to people, that are 400, 500 miles away, but you're building this regional network. And you never know what's going to pop up. And our businesses have really responded incredibly well to that, especially those scaling regionally. We host sessions in different cities across the Southeast. Asheville, which is an Appalachian, Western North Carolina, Pikeville, Kentucky, which is Appalachian, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, which is the urban hub, Lexington, Raleigh, North Carolina. We will host in urban hubs and in the rural areas. We have a very robust investor network. And so a lot of those folks are based in the urban areas. But again, doing that, bridging the urban-rural divide, so many of our businesses are, they're dependent, and they're not so many, they are all dependent on farmers who are their producers, farmers of food, farmers of fiber, farmers of forest products.
Can we share with our listeners an exciting story of a business that, and I loved how you put it, you have these cohorts, but really you're cultivating lifelong relationships with these businesses.
We don't just stop at the end of the 12 weeks. We continue. I'm working with, businesses from the first cohort still. An exciting example right now is Riverbend Malt House. They're the only malt house in the Southeast that makes malt for craft brewing and distilling.
Wow.
And so malt is barley, it's rye, it's wheat. And they've got farmers in Kentucky, North Carolina, and West Virginia growing their grains. So we're working with them and those farmers. Number one, they're going through a big expansion right now because they are the only malt house, and craft brewing and distilling is in such a growth phase that the demand is pretty extraordinary for them. And they just went through a $9.4 million round. They scaled from a 5,000 square foot warehouse to a 20,000 square foot warehouse. And they're expanding their farmers, so they pay their farmers incredibly well. I think the number is 4 times what the farmers had been getting for their barley.
Wow.
And then they're working on grains and practices that are less extractive, and we're working with them to help integrate regenerative practices, passing those along through the businesses to the farmers, because it really stops there with the farmer. But because, our strategy is that these businesses are customers of the farmers. they are in a better position to influence the farmers than if we were to try to recruit those farmers in for a workshop. Hey, can you come to our regenerative, training? Now, I'm glad people are doing that, but our strategy is one of kind of how can we exponentially affect a lot of farmers? And because these businesses are their customers, they might have a more, they'd be more willing. They're like, okay, well, my customer, they're paying me well, and let me see what I can do to incorporate these practices.
Right. And I like that it's a spirit of advantaging farmers rather than more of the sort of punitive approach of regulating or saying you can't do the synthetic fertilizer approach, because such and such reason. It's more of an incentive program.
Right. It really is. And again, keep in mind, this is new. We're ramping this up, looking for businesses and farmers that use those good farming practices, but wanting to go deeper and broader with that and actually provide some information out into the network. Our best guess right now, we have specifics on, like we know Brent has 20 farmers. We know that like the fiber mill, there's a fiber mill that went through our program. They have like 500 farmers that bring their fibers to them. But there are at least 1,000 farmers in this network so far and more to come. So that's Riverbend. Another just amazing business is called Barkhouse. They are actually best in the world B Corporation. They make bark siding for homes and for businesses, and they recover logging waste to do it. Wow. They're not only B Corp, but they are also Cradle to Cradle certified, which is a really hard thing to achieve. And they're based in one of the poorest counties in Western North Carolina, and they've created hundreds of good jobs for laid off loggers, because the industries in North Carolina for many years was furniture and textiles. So many of those businesses were shipped overseas, not only with NAFTA, but then in 2008 when the collapse hit. But you got those skill sets and trained folks in that area, which is another influence over why I selected the kinds of businesses I did, was looking at what was the former economies of our region that are collapsing. And from that compost, what's growing up, and it's farming, and it's food, and it's textiles, and it's land-based forest products. So
Barkhouse actually need.
Yes, exactly. And the people that, again, it all goes back to the nature of this place, which is an incredibly biodiverse place, and wellness, which is a huge piece, botanically based companies using the botanicals in the region for wellness products.
So how has a company like Barkhouse used your services? And it seems like it's a really important piece to have someone like you who's a cheerleader, who's a connector, who's connecting coastal resources, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, and that is actually Barkhouse is a perfect example of a company that in the so they were seeking primarily investment. By the way, they were atypical in that they were a 20-year-old company. Most of our companies are 3 to 4 years in. They're not startups per se. They're not brand new. We look for post revenue that are in growth. Well, Barkhouse, again, was a 20-year company, but in 2008, one of their loans had been sold to some sort of predatory lender. They were having a really hard time, and they were seeking a loan. But they ultimately got their investment from New Resource Bank in San Francisco.
Wow.
And they were just great. But we went through a lot, and it was frustrating for me because I'm like, come on, this is a company that's never missed a payment. Yes, they had this loan, and they survived the 2008 collapse, and they so triple bottom line, paying loggers well, and it was just all the formulas, some of the formulas in the banks and even the CDFIs in our region. We really went through it to try to get lending in our area, and people, it's like they wanted to. But I think their formulas are just broken. But that's a great example. I'm glad you said that, because New Resource Bank in San Francisco was their lender.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You talked about good farming, and especially, when you mentioned paying people like loggers well, or people who are working on the land. I think, we have a level of literacy that we need to bring people up to, because a lot of people are still thinking in the kind of conservation mindset that if we conserve natural resources, that's the way that they'll come back and be abundant again. And I think there's we need to tease that out a little bit. So can you talk about good farming, what that
Yes.
And maybe who some of your influencers are?
Okay. And you're just on point right there with that, because yes, you're absolutely right. And we see this a lot in the philanthropic world. We are a nonprofit, and it's been a challenge, I gotta say, because we're running a business accelerator, and a lot of the traditional nonprofits are, and again, I'm thrilled, they're giving money to conserving resources. So we've been, number one, we've emitted enough carbon now that we could shift entirely to clean energy. And we've got so much carbon in the air that we're still going to be up a creek. We are still. So we have to be sequestering carbon quickly.
Right.
Good farming allows us to actively sequester carbon. And that's the key, is actually just sitting back and saying, okay, we're going to, we're going to conserve. Those are important. All of these things are important. It's important to shift to clean energy. It's important to conserve, but it's also important to be actively sequestering carbon. And that's what good farming does.
Right.
And one of my greatest influencers, and my uncle, Wendell Berry, has been a huge influence on me and my life. And in my early, 20s, I just distinctly remember this conversation about, and he's written about it plenty, about, working with animals and people and the land as an integrated system to restore land use. And we've lost so much of the nutrition in our food because of depleting soil health and so many of the other impacts of bad farming. Right. That has affected, the downstream, the buildup of sediments. Look at, the New Orleans flood was predicted many, many, many years ago. And part of that is the kind of sedimentation, that the soil that's ended up in the river.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember reading that like 20 years ago, I think, in National Geographic, about the predictions. Because obviously the levees and the problems with the levees, there's, a confluence of all kinds of things, but that's one of the negative impacts of bad farming, is what it's doing to our rivers and sedimentation. So, yeah, Wendell has been a big influence in that. My parents, just brilliant, amazing, fun family, spending a lot of time out of doors. Both my parents were physicists. And so we spent a lot of time in discussion about science and about nature, and then just the ethic that they raised me with around inclusion of family and people and nature, and being as close to that as possible. Bell Hooks is a dear friend and a feminist and cultural critic and social justice leader of 40 some odd years. Her writings and her work and her friendship have absolutely affected how I go about my work with inclusive teams. We're a women and minority-led program, and seeking to work with more minority-led businesses. We currently, 75% of our businesses are women-led, but they're primarily white folks leading the businesses. And we have to do better to be more inclusive and actually reach out. So,
how do you balance that tension of being compassionate with yourself, with where you're at right now, while always pushing the bar on becoming more inclusive, reaching that bar that you've set for yourself of the aspirations that you hold for your company and your leadership?
I don't know that I have a ton of self-compassion, and maybe that's not a politically correct thing to say. I'm always analyzing, are we there? How do we get there? How can we do better? And I feel fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of brilliant people in that space, people smarter than me about it, and with real depth of knowledge and empathy. I'm in a fellowship with the BALI program, Be a Localist, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. And the majority of my fellows are the most diverse fellowship that Bali has ever had. In fact, as they pointed out to me, they were like, Sarah, you realize you're the only white woman in this group, right? And we were just new in there. I had not quite registered that. I grew up, most of my friends were actually African-American as a child. And so I didn't, but I was never confused about the fact that I had a privilege that my friends did not.
Right.
And it's always felt wrong that the injustice that continues on today, it's the way that I grew up with parents that were activists and civil rights activists. And then so many of my friends were African-American. But there's no confusion on my part that I have a level of privilege that my African-American friends did not. And the older I've gotten, the more I've delved into this and brought it into my work and read the research on the inequity, especially in net worth between African-American families and white families in this country. It's extraordinary. It's so stark that it's like 10 to 1 because wealth has been systematically extracted Black families and Black communities in this country up through until today. And we're not just talking about slavery. We're talking about through the years, through policies, through redlining. So working with folks in my fellowship, working with Desiree Attaway, who does diversity as an asset training and is a leader in her own space around social justice, and how we can bring that more into the business world, and attract more African American businesses, and then educate many of our existing businesses on the value of diverse teams is really an important piece, because as progressive as you might think that you are, you can always go deeper with that and have more depth of understanding around the values, the emotional intelligence, the other kinds of intelligence, the other kinds of backgrounds that are going to make your team stronger. And that's what that piece of training is about that we're getting ready to get into with Desiree.
Is there a moment, maybe a story or a conversation that you've had recently, maybe with one of your businesses or with one of your fellows in the cohort at Bali, where you've really had like a moment that exemplifies what you're talking about, or maybe some of your businesses are grappling with that right now? Or is there a business that, even though many of your businesses you mentioned are owned by and led by white women, are there any that are kind of trying to fix that right now or trying to diversify, and how are they encountering this challenge?
We haven't. So this is a new piece of the training. We did when we launched this program, we advertised and promoted that we were actively seeking minority and women-led businesses, and we did not have very many applicants. One of our first businesses was Native American from the region, and a Native American wellness company.
What business is that?
Native Touch, although she is not producing right now. She's actually leading ceremonies, and she's also an incredible musician. And she and her husband, Laura Lynn Riverwind and Joseph Riverwind, they're leading big ceremonies and gatherings and performing. So they're not in production, but they have the most incredible skin products. I look forward to them getting back to that again. I mean, like healing eczema, and she's using ancient knowledge from handed down by her ancestors, as well as she's a PhD in, it's a chemical science. I can't remember the specific name of it, but anyway, so she's got the best of both worlds there, but she's also multi-talented. But the most recent conversation I had with Desiree was to say, with a name like Accelerating Appalachia, it's going to be hard for you to attract Black-owned businesses. And that's where we get to the stereotypes of Appalachia, and that she felt, and I think she's got a point. I'm not that when people think of Appalachia, they think of racism. And so this is an important piece. I wasn't unaware of that when we launched the program. We sought to celebrate the natural biodiversity of our region, which is for Appalachia is unparalleled. There's more cultural diversity than people are aware of, but that is, that's a real factor. And so we do have a couple of other names that we've always had for the program, because we always envisioned that it would be a model that could be made available to other parts of the country. There's so much interest in it, and folks saying, well, how can we get that in our town? So we haven't announced any new names yet, but we do have some we're testing out right now.
Wow.
I don't want a name to be off-putting for folks.
Right. That's you bring up an incredible, I never thought of it that way, I look at similar parallel challenges in my region of Sonoma County, which tends to be a lot less diverse, it strikes me that the old model of kind of white environmentalists is not going to cut it anymore, in terms of we're all grappling with how do we do farming and take care of our soil in a way that doesn't marginalize the social justice piece, and really brings that right up front.
Yep. And that's the other conversation, those are the other conversations I'm having with Desiree and my Bali fellows, is not just, the Appalachian region, but the environmental world, the world of greenies, is it's largely dominated by white folks, and not that it needs to be, but I've lived in those communities. Asheville is, a progressive community, and they like to think they're very diverse, but they're not. And there's still a lot of separation in community in that town. But for us, just because we do have the expertise, we do have a really great program, name aside, and we're going deeper and actively reaching into Black-owned business communities, Black chambers of commerce, to get folks, to join our program. And that won't be until 2018 because we're working on this redesign right now.
Right. Meantime, I know you did have a few other businesses that you wanted to share with our listeners.
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to be, I'm working right now with a couple so we've got enough folks coming to us. I'm like, well, we're not running the program at this moment, but I am working with some of them. We are working with some of them one-on-one, mostly me right now. Two right now out of Kentucky, So Organic. And they've developed software that simplifies the organic certification process. We are super excited about this company because, this can be huge. They're just in terms of affecting land use, organic practices. And I think, this is feedback anybody working this space hears it all the time. Well, it's grown organically, but I can't. The whole organic certification process is just, it's too cumbersome. And I don't think it's necessarily a lot of people, and I would agree, it's not necessarily a perfect system, but they have simplified that process. Organic is on the rise. I think there's a 19% increase in demand for organics. So I'm excited to be working with them to help them get their software out there. And then Floyd's, this is a local Lexington fellow who distributes across the region, the Kentucky region, although he could distribute further. But he is working with organic chicken feed, which is kind of hard to come by. There's not a lot of outlets for that, and he's working a lot with backyard chicken folks. But he's also wanting to start a farm and home store, not just be a distributor. Although that's like a core piece of his revenue stream. Right. But a store where people can also come to and get sort of back to the land suppliers, people wanting to make their own, grow their own, and have a nice options for supplies for them.
Yeah, the chicken feed is a huge, really, really hard challenge for a lot of farmers. I know there's a biodynamic farmer here in Sonoma County that eventually, because biodynamic is so about reducing inputs on your farm system, he eventually would love to grow his own chicken feed. But in the meantime, gotta go with the best supplier possible that you can find.
And often they have to have it shipped from far away. It costs a lot of money. So he's looking at doing delivery to regions, pickup points, which is, again, solving an important problem.
And then one other that struck my eye was the sweetgrass.
Yes, sweetgrass granola. We love them. They are also a Kentucky-based company. They're using sorghum as a sweetener, working all with local farms. They connected so we've got another company that from the 2016 cohort that's growing chia in Kentucky. They have an early blooming chia. It's non-GMO. Yeah. It's a non-GMO, but they are able to grow it north of the equator. And so Heartland Chia is now providing. So they connected through our cohort. They were both in the same cohort together, along with a beverage company called Bakwa, which is an ancient grain beverage, barley lemonade beverages. But no, Bakwa. So they're both using grains. They're using chia from Chris at Heartland, and Sweetgrass is using their chia. They are also have just launched a wonderful veggie snack. And these they're almost like little truffles, but they're made of veggies and fruit. I think one truffle is, for a child anyway, is a fourth of the daily vegetable serving that they require. And they actually taste really good. Wow. So they just launched that new brand, Ellie Finn's Veggie Snacks, named after their two kids, Ellie and Finn. And again, Kentucky company, and they've just gotten into stores in the Kentucky region so far.
Yeah, even I didn't think that you could produce a product with Kentucky-grown sweeteners,
Right. Sorghum is pretty amazing. It has a low glycemic index. It's one of the best sweeteners out there. Granted, it has its own flavor. It's not something you could easily disguise, but sorghum is a lovely plant that grows in Kentucky and other parts of the Southeast. I'm not sure what other parts of the country it grows in. I know it does grow in our region. I believe sorghum was originally derived from Africa. I could be wrong. But anyway.
And one last area, I would be remiss if I didn't kind of reveal my own passion for fibers and textiles.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what's happening right now in the textile sector, especially in Kentucky?
In Kentucky, yes. So, and oh my gosh, yes, because I absolutely want to mention River Hill Ranch. She's an alpaca farmer in Kentucky, and she's got sort of several different verticals, retail at her shop. She does camps and tours for kids. So there's the alpaca, but then there's also the hemp and what's happening in Kentucky in hemp. And hemp is the fiber, Hemp is a food. Kentucky was the first state to legalize hemp back in 2014. Pretty sure they were ahead of the pack. They actually were the number one state in the nation for hemp growing back when it was legal. They were the top rope producer, I guess. But you probably are familiar with the hemp flag and fiber shed, and Rebecca out in California and fiber shed. And she had a big hand in making the hemp flag, because our original flag was made with hemp. And she worked with Mike Lewis from Growing Warriors and many others. The hemp was grown in Kentucky. I'm not sure all the pieces and parts of who, but I think Rebecca was she and her folks largely were the ones making the flag that was then flown in 2015, I think, at the Capitol. On the roof of somewhere at the White House. So it's a great story, and it's actually, something real that's happening. The way that hemp is taking off in our state is very encouraging, not just in fiber, but in food. We helped connect Mike Lewis from Growing Warriors to one of our businesses out of Asheville called Smiling Hara Tempeh, and now they've launched a product called Hempeh, and it's the best tempeh I've ever had in my life. And yes, you can order it online, smilinghara.com.
Wow.
It is so fun. I mean, Chad, they're a 7 or 8 year business. He's actually gone to Indonesia. He studied the processes, but it's a non-soy hempeh. It's made with hemp seeds and peanuts, and it is just so tasty. So yes, I'm promoting that. But it's so cool. We connected them to Kentucky growers, and now they've got a nice partnership going.
That's so exciting in a realm where, there's just so much focus on the other aspects of hemp that aren't so positive. Yeah. You're focusing on the nutrient value, the basic human need of food, and that's really
right. Yeah, and one of the companies is doing CBD. I could again just go on and on about the companies.
Great.
That's what it's all about, really. That's why we're here.
So another question for you as we wrap up is, how can our listeners provide support? What can they do to give back and, follow your work and contribute? Is there something specific that you have a request that our listeners might be able to help with?
Sure, thanks. Well, you can, of course, go like our Facebook page and follow us, and you can sign up for updates on our newsletter. I'm not a big newsletter person. I could be better at that. Anybody, I get a ton of emails, so I try not to put too much out there and overwhelm your inboxes. You might hear from us a couple of times a year via a newsletter. You're going to see more on our Facebook page. And of course, we are a nonprofit, and this has been as great as far as we've come in the development of our program, and we feel like we've providing better education and training than we ever have. It has been the hardest year for fundraising we have ever encountered. And we're hearing a lot that folks are shifting money into politics because of the political situation. And I get that, and I think it's important. But yes, we'd love a donation in acceleratingappalachia.org. There's a donate button there, but /donate. Yes, every dollar counts. We do have some incentives for folks that are donating at a higher level. Books signed by Wendell Berry personally to you, and Bell Hooks personally to you. So that's my little plug. And then, we welcome your thoughts, and we welcome your input on, businesses that you know of out there that you think would be a good fit. Even though our application is not open right now, you can email me, Sara Day, SaraDay, @acceleratingappalachia.org, and recommend some businesses for us now that you've kind of got a sense of what we're seeking. And again, we are open to applications from across the country. And if you're interested in our model, in your community, we are open to, and you just, wanting to get dialed in how to ensure that the model does translate and that it doesn't, we want to make sure that you've got a community of mentors and investors. So we would do a vetting process, but we're very open to sharing this model with communities. Another piece of what we're working on right now is just making sure we have the criteria clear when we do go to share it so that it succeeds.
Well, I love that, Sara. And I love, you feel like it really does feel like a sister to Lift. Even though we're different structures, you're a nonprofit and we're a for-profit, we're really so aligned in terms of sort of the lens with which we select, companies and partners to work with. And
absolutely.
And the
and I have such admiration for the Lift economy folks, and I've spent time on your website. I've talked with a few. I love the work that you're doing, and it is absolutely aligned. So, let's work more together. I'm all like, how can we come together and not be in our little pods?
Yes.
That's kind of a gripe of mine. Everybody's like jostling to be, I'm the regenerative economy expert. No, I am. I'm like, we've got a lot of people that are really good and working at this. And the more that we can see what one another are doing and how we can complement one another and collaborate is really important.
Yeah, we don't need
and
any
I'm just
more.
as guilty. I get all my nose down, and I'm not, but I really want to do better at that, because that's the only way that we're really going to make the shift, is to be more collaborative.
Right, and the tension you mentioned around people having to kind of prioritize moving their resources into fighting, against, and fighting for policies that all of that is so important. And we need to make sure we're not losing sight of actually building the next economy that's going to bridge us into, right.
Yeah. Into something that's actually, regenerative for the future. I try to be, I think maybe I'll wrap up with this, is that a few years ago, I was visiting Wendell, and he has his long-legged house that he built on the Kentucky River, which for the last 40 years, that's where he's written everything. He's written his essays, his poetry, his novels, but I was just feeling kind of down and kind of like, what's the point? And does it even matter? And he just sort of said, Sara Day, times are too dire to be anything but hopeful. And that has just stuck with me, and that you've got to be hopeful. We don't have a choice.
Wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, to share your stories of regeneration and repair, and earth repair that you're
at it. And people repair.
And people repair.
Thank you. I think that we all do.
Yes. I know you've got so much on your plate, and I'm so grateful that you would choose to take some time to speak with us and share this important work.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.